It's January 4th, 2021. I'm Dan Hook, and this is Get Outdoors with Hook Outdoors. It's being recorded here at our Hook Outdoors retail location located on Cave Run Lake. And today it is my pleasure to interview Kris Mann. He's half of the Mann duo of the Crappie USA fishing fame, and he's going to talk to us today about Crappie USA and some techniques and just crappie fishing in general. So, Kris, if you will, just start us off and give us a little bit of bio about yourself and your dad, and we'll just go from there.
Certainly. Well, Dan, thanks for having me on. Happy New Year to our listeners, and I just wanted to let you guys know that we love crappie fishing. That's what we're here to talk about today. And my dad and I were blessed several years ago. I think now, Dan, we started back in 2007 fishing tournaments with Crappie USA.
Yeah.
And I noticed there yesterday, I keep a count of it, and we fished 59 tournaments, I believe, with the Crappie USA organization.
Oh, yeah.
Of those years. So, but like you mentioned, it's a team of me and my father. We fished together. He kind of introduced me to the sport of fishing. And we started out like most people, just fishing farm ponds, fishing from the bank of lakes, from the shoreline of different lakes and ponds, and maybe doing a little wade fishing in creeks. And before you knew it, that kind of grown into we got a boat, and,
right?
And then I took it to a different level. And so several years after chasing primarily crappie, we decided we wanted to get in the tournament game. So.
That's awesome. And speaking of the whole Crappie USA tournament deal, and like I said, I'm kind of dating myself here, but the Crappie USA is what used to be the Crappie-thon, and they've just taken it all to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's kind of a different sport then. Back when they started, it was a few tag fish, and you were trying to catch those tag fish. And now they've gone to formats where you weigh your 7 biggest crappie. So you search a body of water trying to find those 7 biggest fish, and you weigh those in, and whoever has the largest weight is the victor of the tournament. And it is just remarkable the changes we've seen.
And I guess that that's kind of what I want to lead off with. Is just the evolution or the growth, if you will, of crappie fishing, because anyone that knows much about me, I'm born and raised here on Cave Run Lake, and have fished pretty much all my life. And just years ago, crappie fishing was more of a hobby or a sideline. Everything was pretty much bass fishing or muskie fishing, but crappie fishing has grown to be its own industry, if you will. And if you could expand on that, as far as like they have, what is the big crappie show they have in?
We go up Grizzly Jig Show out Brothersfield, Missouri. And then we do. There's just things going on. Wally Marshall's thing that he's got right now. The Invitational. So they call it the Crappie Expo.
Yes, the Crappie Expo, and 15 years ago, that kind of thing was unheard of, and like with the old crappie-thon, it was a thing of trying to catch a tag fish, and that would just always amaze me that they would put these tag fish in here. And this is a big hole of water, and you're trying to find one decent tag fish in 8,200 acres. And I just was always wondering about how that all worked and everything. But this is more of a typical tournament setup, isn't it? Like what you were talking about. I mean, you have weigh-ins and the whole deal.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's getting more and more like the bass fishing world each and every day. As a matter of fact, I got an invitation just this past week from a gentleman who's trying to set up a tournament trail that's just one angler. So doing away with the team concept. He's doing one angler, artificial only, one pole only. and they are trying to move actually toward what's called, the Major League Fishing.
Yeah.
Fish are weighed.
Sure, yeah, you have periods and stuff and all like that.
And you release the fish immediately upon them being weighed. And this guy's, he's starting this trail, and he's sending invitations out to what he thought was top 30 anglers in the country.
Right.
So it was kind of a unique opportunity.
I guess that's a question I hadn't thought of, but like, at a lot of bass tournament weigh-ins and stuff, they release the fish. Are those release tournaments also?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
Most of what we fish, on occasion you'll have a little club tournament where guys will
keep, sure, yeah. But these big national tournaments, everything's turned loose.
They're released, and I think that's a great idea, Dan, because locals don't like to see a lot of kind of hotshot anglers come into their lake, take some of the biggest fish.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, like, you take like if you have a team come in and they have 5 or 7 fish that all go about 14 or 15 inches. That's and they leave the lake. That's a pretty good dent in the population, especially if you've got 30 or 40 teams that are doing that kind of thing. And just and back to like the evolution and the growth of it, just the popularity of it, and just the way it's changed, and it's not just a bucket of minnows and all like that. I mean, it's still, I think part of the appeal of it is the access to information. And you can find out what's going on with the fish and all like that, and the economics of it. Granted, there's high-end equipment out there with the electronics and stuff, but still, you can watch a few videos, get a few tips, and you can go catch them versus and pretty inexpensively versus bass fishing, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, bass fishing seems to be way more of a equipment-intensive style of fishing.
Sure. Sure.
And as you mentioned, you can take a cane pole, you can take a bobber, go fish off the bank and catch crappie. But I will tell you this, Dan, in today's time, the electronics, the advances in equipment, these guys have taken this to a different level.
That's what I was going to talk to you about. Last week we had John Cruz on. He's an Elite Series angler and all that. And one of the questions we kindly dove into, we were talking about the electronics, and he was telling us that he kindly felt that hurt him, especially toward the end of the season, because he didn't have the same setup as some of the other guys did. And he told us what he was going to do, and I just seen he had put it out on social media yesterday, and he is basically running everything. He's got the Garmin and the Lowrance and the Humminbird set up, and he's got the best of each of those rigged up in his boat, or rigging them up in his boat now. And that's what a lot of those guys had, and I'm sure it's similar in the crappie, especially in the pro crappie world.
Well, I will say this, Dan, and there may be some bass guys that argue out there. And of course, John got to experience what Patrick Walters put the whipping on him down at Lake Forge.
Yeah, buddy.
Using Garmin Live Scope. And what's going on in the bass world right now in terms of them recognizing the true potential of some of these electronics, whether it be Humminbird 360, Live Scope, Lowrance has got their new forward-facing sonar that just came out. What those guys are experiencing is what we've already been involved with probably for the last 3 years in the crappie industry. Crappie are predominantly a structural-oriented fish. Not to say they won't suspend. There's lakes down south where those fish spend the majority of their life just suspended in open water.
I'll be darned.
But primarily they are, in most lakes, a structural-oriented type fish.
Right.
Crappie fishermen that fish the tournaments have embraced that technology for years now. There are guys that are so good at reading their electronics with this new forward-facing sonar and the live scope and things from Garmin, that these guys can literally pick their fish They can chase those fish down. They will recognize that, hey, that is a tournament grade fish, and they follow them. So
that's crazy.
I'm doing some of that, experimenting some of it. I'm not near as good as a lot of these guys yet, but we know that's where this thing's going.
I was watching, and this has been, you were talking about how the crappie world has been into the electronics even before it becomes such a big deal in the bass world. And this has probably been a couple of 3 years ago. And I was watching a YouTube video of one of these upper tier crappie anglers, and he was just sitting in a treetop, nondescript. I mean, wasn't anything fancy. And you were watching his screen there, and you could see these crappie going in and out this treetop, and it had such a resolution to it. You could see the jig dropping down in there, and you'd see this fish come and I mean, he actually never watched his rod tip or anything. He just watched that bait and watched that fish. And
it's so much like video game fishing now. And I will say this, Dan, just sharing you guys. We're not bragging. We understand any blessing we ever get, victories or success we get comes from the Lord. But we've had some pretty good success in the last 3 or 4 tournaments that we fished. We fished one actually this past Saturday. In several of these tournaments, I think we've won 3 of our last 4. And those, we finished second in the other one. And the ones that we won, we distanced the field by as much as 2 pounds in our weight on our 7.
And that's a bunch in the crappie world. That's a huge amount in the crappie world.
And the reason I even share that is we embrace this, and a lot of guys in these smaller tournament trails they're getting there. They're coming along. But we've been fishing with that on a national tournament trail against some very stiff competition. You learn to read those graphs. You learn to let that guide you. And we're literally picking the fish we want to fish for under the water.
I guess, and on the subject of electronics, what do you think is more important to the successful fishing trip? Your knowing how to read that map and the elevations and the topography, or just going through and side scanning or whatever and finding fish? And is mapping more important because you kind of need to know where the fish are in general?
That's a wonderful question, Dan. It's kind of a complicated answer, but it's a great question, because if you know a lake like Cave Run Lake the way that you know it, obviously I don't need to look at a graph to know the topography.
Right.
To me, then side scan becomes important, and even more than side scan, because I know where all the brush piles are at. Lake is that live scope where I can pick out an individual fish. So I may stroll up to a brush pile I know is there, scan it. If it doesn't have the size fish that I'm looking for, then I'm on to the next one. And that's crazy.
That's crazy to think about, that you can actually look at, like you're window shopping. Like, there's nothing there that fits. Let's go on down the road.
And that's the funny thing about it. It's not only looking to see if there's fish on it, looking to see if there's the size.
I mean, your electronics is so good. If you even need to stop there or not.
Certainly, and just what a time saver that is. But on the flip side, if I'm going to a lake that I'm not familiar with, I have no clue. Mapping is so important. I've got to be able to, we run into that frequently when we go fish a lake maybe in another state on the tournament trail that we've not been to before, not familiar with. You have to have a way of narrowing that water down. You're getting, sometimes we may fish a body of water like a couple years ago we went to a gunner's field, not been on gunner's field. Huge body of water on the river. You're trying to figure out where do I need to go. I said Coosa was on the Cumberland. So anyway, we go there. It's just a lot of water. You get on your mapping before you ever get to that place, and you start narrowing areas down. Then you use your side scan. So I'm going to say that they're both equally important, just depending on kind of the scenario that you're fishing.
Okay, well, with that, talking about unfamiliar waters, and you're looking at your map right off, what are you looking for when you're like, say, going somewhere you've never been before, and you got that map out? What areas are you going to kindly dial in on?
And Another good question, Dan. You got good questions. I like this. It's really important. I think seasonal patterns for fish are so important.
I know. Yeah, the time of year. Okay, well, we'll even narrow it down further than that. Okay, say you're going to, you're going to Guntersville in April. Water's getting pretty warm there. I don't know exactly what their spawning time is, but by April there, typically in that part of Alabama, the water's getting pretty warm there. And what are you looking for? I mean, I don't know as far as on a competitive level. I know crappie like to cover, but there's grass and everything down there. So what are you looking for whenever you're going down there?
If you're looking at an April time frame, and that's why it's such a complicated question probably to answer, is because fish do certain things certain times of the year.
Yeah.
Late March, early April, Guntersville, you're starting to look toward the spawn. Fish
Sure.
are, that time of year in early April, you're probably looking at fish at all phases of the spawn.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking
There
at a
is.
few that have already, black crappie tend to spawn before white crappie.
Mm-hmm.
Guntersville's got a huge population of black crappie, and a lot of those fish may be on kind of the tail end of post-spawn.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a lot of fish that are actively spawning around that time of year, and then some will be pre-spawn, looking to move up. What I'm looking for primarily during that time of the year is active fish, and a lot of those fish are going to be moving shallow, getting ready to spawn. So you're looking at places with gravel type bottoms, with a lot of wood structure where those fish will go up and lay their eggs. Females, a lot of times, they will stage in areas right on channel breaks, a depth change out away from that structure. The minute that they get ready to spawn, they'll move up, and that's when you're looking to target those shallow fish. So, this time of year or that time of year in Guntersville, I'm probably looking for shallow stump fields. There's a lot of stumps in there. That time of year, weeds not necessarily established real well that early in the year. Not ruling that out. There's some dead grass around that you could catch some, but probably target more hard structure, wood type stuff.
I guess that, from what I've read and just my own experience, it just seems like crappie seem to orient more toward wood structure and more solid stuff. I personally have never caught any or heard of anyone much. There's a lot of grass on Cave Run, and I don't know if is grass a crappie thing.
It can be, and we've had many conversations about the crappie here on Cave Run relating to the weeds. Probably 8 to 10 years ago, we had the grass come up, and it topped out really well on this lake, and grass mats, and all over the flats, all over out from Zilpo Beach. Dad and I caught some outstanding black crappie when those weeds were. What would happen when it matted up? You could actually find holes down in that grass. We would go around and dip those holes, with a jig, just vertical jig. A lot of times dead sticking it, just holding it still. Weren't catching a lot of numbers, but the fish we were catching was really good ones. We have tried that in the years since, and that bite has really dwindled for us. We rarely catch a fish off that. And the only correlation that I could make in the reduced bite was about the time that the weeds started kind of dissipating. The Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife began to put big brush piles out on the lake. Started the Habitat Project. That it operated like a magnet for those main lake fish. They hadn't had structure out in some of those areas, and man, they just went to it. It really helped fishermen catch fish, but it really kind of put a hurt in there a little bit on some of the bigger population.
I guess that's that's a question I had. That was a pretty big effort, a pretty big program here. Overall, has that habitat reef program, from a retail standpoint, it seems to have helped, because I have a lot more what I call day fishermen, and even locals that just, have them 5 or 6 brush piles picked out. They have better trips. They have more trips where they catch a consistent number of decent fish all the time.
Absolutely. I think it has been a good thing for the fishermen, for the fish. I, was blessed to play a very small role in putting some of the structure
Sure.
out and helping them do that. And Tom Timmerman, the biologist over here,
Right.
He just does a great job. I think that it really helped with the crappie population in terms of, instead of them being so spread out and concentrated on fish, it helped fishermen. But one thing that fishermen struggle to realize is a healthy lake has fish from all different age groups.
Sure, yeah.
The guy that's looking to fill his live well to go, put them on grease and fry them in the evening, man, he's just concerned about, 10-inch and 12-inch fish.
Yeah.
If he doesn't catch, a boatload of those, he's complaining, saying, they need to do something about this lake. But, you've got to recognize it takes small fish to make big fish.
It does.
And a lot of these reefs really help that.
And, there's a balance there, I think, as far as, fish getting stunted and that kind of thing. I don't know if that's an issue here as much.
No, but I've seen some lakes, Dan, that it is a huge issue.
Yeah.
And you can talk to a lot of fishermen up in Indiana, and not to get into that too much, but those guys, they complain a lot about their department because they've got lakes like Patoka Lake in Indiana. You might go to Patoka and catch a trophy fish, a 2.5, 3 pound crappie, but you're way more likely to go up there and catch 200 6 and 7 inch crappie. And those guys, there seems to be no balance there. This lake has got great balance to it.
From what I see and talk to guys that come through here and buy minnows, some of my regular customers, they'll have days where they don't do as well, but over a season, they do pretty good. I mean, they do. And crappie are just, I think they're cyclical like that. I think there's just certain times of the year where you're going to have to weed through a bunch of small ones to get to the good ones. But just over a season, I've got a dozen regulars here they're pretty satisfied with it. And I guess that's a question I've got. You've crappie fished all over. I mean, how does Cave Run stack up, at least on a regional level anyway?
I'll say this. Cave Run is an oligotrophic lake. It's not extremely fertile. It would be considered a highland type of reservoir.
Right.
Most of our water's coming from Salyersville Way and here. One thing I've learned over the years, Dan, fisheries that are in agricultural areas that are getting a runoff, they're getting influx of water that's coming in, rainwater, that's nutrient rich. They're getting a lot of fertilizers, which helps for the growth of zooplankton and phytoplankton, which your shad feed on, and on. So a lot of this state has got some fantastic lowland reservoirs that are extremely fertile. Kentucky Lake, Barkley Lake, you see those lakes that are just always at the top of the list. Green River Lake, is just off the chart.
I know it's a super bass lake.
It's a super bass lake, and it's a super crappie lake for keeper-sized crappie. Now, as far as how Cave Run stacks up, I'll say this. If I was looking to fill a freezer with numbers of 10 to 11.5-inch fish, Green River would be my choice, hands down, even over Cave Run or Barkley. If I was looking for this area of the state to catch a really nice fish, I would be right here at Cave Run.
I've seen this past summer, of course, there were more people fishing this year, but just this past summer alone, I saw probably 5 crappie that were over 18 inches. And one was 18 3/4, biggest one I've ever seen. Daggone thing was big as a dinner plate. I've never seen a crappie like that. And saw a lot of nice 13, 14, 15-inch fish, and that's what really surprised me versus 10 years ago before they had all this reef program, because you saw a lot of fish, but now I'm seeing more bigger fish now.
I think there's a number of reasons for that, to be honest with you. I think anglers have just gotten better, really. I'll be honest with you. I think those fish always existed here.
Yeah.
We're seeing something that's going on now that never went on before. And with the advent of social media, guys get on there. We post how we catch the fish, where we're catching the fish. We try to share information.
Right.
In particular, Dad and I that have some sponsorship. I think your sponsor they want that out of you. They want you teaching folks how to catch the fish.
Yeah.
And, us as well as many others have been sharing information pretty loosely. I think a lot of guys down here have gotten much better at catching fish. One thing to understand about Cave Run, though, with being oligotrophic, those fish that get to those trophy size, those 16-inch fish, which are rare, those are extremely old fish.
Oh, yeah,
those
sure.
Fish have outlived, you take a Kentucky lake where, a fish gets up to keeper size within 2 years, Cave Run, you're looking at 3.5 years for fish to get to the same size. So the thing I think is so important to understand is when people start taking 16 to 18-inch fish away from this lake, you're not going to see them replaced very quickly.
No.
A lot of years.
No, you're not. And that's the same way with the muskie. People don't realize that upper 40, 50-inch muskie here, even though they're a stock fish, that's an old fish. That fish has been here a while.
Absolutely.
They don't grow at a rapid rate like they do a lot of other places. In the same way with the bass and everything, they just don't have the growth rate here. And talking about Cave Run, well, first I read somewhere where as far as like freshwater fish that I'm familiar with, they talk about crappie have the best eyesight, and that they're more, I guess eyesight, but that they're more affected by color, like a lure color and all that kind of thing. And that's why you'll see some of these guys that'll have a million different colors of jigs or tubes or grubs. I mean, is that the case? I mean, are they?
We're firm believers in that, Dan, and I do know very good fishermen, very successful fishermen out here across the country that will tell you that color doesn't make that much difference. They may have a confidence go-to color that they fish primarily. I know one guy that fishes one color all the time, and very successful. That has not been the case for Dad and I. I will say this, I think that a lot of it has to do with confidence.
Sure, yeah.
As with anything, if you go out and you expect to catch them, it kind of helps you. But we have just noticed so many times over the years where there's a finicky bite going on, we change colors, and then bam, automatically start catching fish.
Sure.
That is one advantage, I think, to the team aspect of having two guys that fish.
Right.
Dad's great. He's usually back in the back of the boat changing out colors a lot while I'm, working on the trolling.
Yeah, buddy.
And so that works out well for us. But crappie, I really do think it makes a difference, especially when you start talking about stained water. You've got, when you get into stained or muddy water and fish are having a hard time seeing that lure, I'm a firm believer that your colors like a black and chartreuse, an orange and chartreuse, green and chartreuse, some of those that put off a little hue to them, and I think those make a difference.
Are you on the professional level, is it typically an artificial bait deal, or do some of the top tier anglers still rely on live bait?
And a lot of the top tier guys are still relying on a live bait. I think you're going to see that change in the next few years, especially with the live scope. A few things that are happening there is some of the tournament trails are actually pushing to get away from live bait fishing, and one of those I mentioned was this invitational deal. Received the invitation to. That's going to be a artificial only. The Wally Marshall Classic that we just went to in Missouri this past year is an artificial only. So some of these bigger tournaments are going to that.
And it's not just like plastics, like grubs and tubes and that sort of thing. there's from what I've seen in my wholesale catalogs. I mean, there's like little crankbaits and all that kind of stuff. I find that hard to fathom winging a little old crankbait that's no bigger than your thumb out through there. But I guess it works. But then I think too, where fish are like that are so oriented around the hard cover. I mean, is that for like in some of those southern lakes you mentioned, like where you'll find those crappie that are suspended out there and you're like that?
Yeah, and there's certain times it typically post spawn you're going to see fish spread out in the water column. It's one of the hardest times for crappie fishermen throughout the year.
Right.
Cave run, that's typically going to be your May, early June time frame. Not always. Here we see this water fluctuate much and do some things.
Yeah.
But typically, 1st of May through maybe the 1st of June, you're going to see a time where fish, they've just got done spawning. Females, it's like they don't feel good.
Right, sure.
They get back out and they're kind of, we call it staging. They're waiting to move to what their summer haunts are. And those fish can be caught using crankbaits, trolling. So a lot of times it's not necessarily a casting game as much as it is they're trolling those. And they're pulling, sometimes as many as 8 rods behind the boat.
Yeah, I see some of these guys and that come through here and they've got these rod holders all up and down their boats. I mean, I don't even know how many rods they can put out, and I guess they drift or just kind of ease around and everything. That just looks like a lot to keep up with for me.
It can be if you get your rod links correct and you get your holder placement.
Is that the deal with it? Is you're just fishing different depths and just
what you try to do is with those rod holders, you try to position them in such a way when you stick your rods in. And the best way to do it is your first rod's in your rack. So you've kind of got them turned at, let's say it's about a 30-degree angle to the corners of your boat.
Yeah.
And the first rod in your rack, you want it longer than your last rod.
Okay.
You actually want it longer than any of your other rods, but in particular last one.
Okay.
And when they do that, it allows your baits to have space between them and water columns. So it can be a super effective way and very fun because a lot of times, especially on Cave Run, you may catch that muskie that's out there, you may catch that bass that you weren't expecting. So bonus fish.
And speaking of Cave Run, and I guess it's that way in a lot of other lakes, but the crappie, the nighttime bite here on Cave Run is a big deal. Is that something that you guys do pretty regular?
We don't so much, Dan. I've done it a lot down here. I know a lot of guys who do it.
Yeah.
They do it very well. There's a lot of fish. To me, it's a lot of work. It's pretty labor intensive by the time you set up lights. You may have to run a generator.
Yeah, and just the one of the first crappie lights that I remember, my dad had a truck headlight stuck in a piece of styrofoam that hooked a battery in the boat, and now you've got these lights that are $200 or $300 for a submersible LED crappie light, and but now there is one guy that you can see after dark if you go up 801 here and pull in like at Muskie Bend or Lake Vista. You can see him over there kindly at the mouth of what would be Little Cave Run, Big Cave Run, and you can see him. You can see him from 801. It is bright as I don't understand what keeps him from getting eat up by bugs. But now he's got ever light. I mean, he's over there. He's over there.
In the house.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. And talking about you're talking about that technique there, and I've always been curious. And we've been talking about different lakes. And I'm more familiar with like bass fishing and TVA lakes and stuff. I know like on a lot of those TVA deals, whenever they get to generating power and that current picks up, a lot of times those fish will really kick into gear and there'll be a pretty hot bite for a while. Are crappie a current-oriented fish like that, or are they more a reservoir type deal like this, like Cave Run is?
It is, that's the mystery that if we could figure out, would be the $1 million mystery. There's a lot of guys that'll tell you when they're fishing, let's use Kentucky Lake, for instance.
Right.
When they start drawing, current. Some guys will say, hey, our bite picked up, and other guys will say our bite just died when it happened. I think it's all about position and where you're at. If you fished much, some of our listeners here on Kentucky Lake, if you haven't been there, when they open those gates, man, and they start generating power, in the summertime sometimes, and they're truly open, the gates wide open, you will see such a current, it'll sweep the buoys that are on the main river.
I've seen that myself.
They'll be laying over, and you're out there trying to hold. And normally what happens on that, those main lake drops and those channel edge bite, if you're on that and they start drawing power, you're done. And a lot of times what will happen, the backs of the creeks, midway back in the creeks, you'll see those fish really start firing up. And we think it's because bait may be, it's starting to move that bait with that current back in those creeks. So fish start migrating up in there to get to them. So it's interesting. We're always trying to figure that out.
Have the carp hurt the crappie fishing on Kentucky Lake like they have the bass fishing?
I don't know, Dan. I didn't fish enough there previous. I mean, I fished it a lot, but I haven't fished enough previous to the incoming carp to say. A lot of locals will tell you it has hurt. I know overall the weights on those tournaments had gone down when the carp really started getting prolific. We started seeing the weights started going down, so everyone was saying, they're hurting the crappie. Now we're seeing the weights go back up in these tournaments. So it almost makes you think maybe it was just a cyclical deal where now, we're having some more good spawns, some more good years. But some guys, they've said some things that make sense in terms of that. They said if these carp are up there feeding in the shallows and they're, you can watch them. You can see them a lot of times. They'll be up, especially if the water gets up and it's flooded around willows or buckbrush. They'll be up there right against that structure, literally with their lips on that structure, feeding whatever it is. And they said, hey, even if a carp is not interested in eating a crappie egg, but that egg is there on that structure, it's going to eat the egg. And it does make some sense. And maybe that has hurt a little bit. But probably the bigger issue that it causes for guys like us, the crappie fishermen, is we're scanning along trying to find structure to fish, and there's times those carp are so thick you literally cannot see the structure.
I've heard that. It's just nothing. It's just got your whole screen. It's just solid lit up, and there's nothing to pick out because it's just a big solid orange or what have you.
Especially when you get into the creeks, and if you don't know the difference between a carp and structure, you're just going to spend all day long trying to fish for a carp.
That's crazy. That's crazy. But I guess so. And back to the current versus non-current deal. With all the lakes you've fished, are they more reservoir type deals like this that don't really have a big draw, or are they more current oriented lakes?
We fished a good combination of both. Obviously I'm more familiar with a lake like this, a flood control type deal. Really what I've noticed is flood control type lakes, you can kind of figure that out. Like if the water's really up and they're drawing a lot of water to try to get it down, then it seems a little easier to plan than it does if you go to a Kentucky lake and they're trying to generate power. So there you would have to keep up with these, schedules at the time of day. Sometimes they just draw power or start producing power, and you don't know when that's going to be. You don't know. So you may be out there on a bite on the main river channel, catching some fish, and all of a sudden you start noticing my line's starting to sweep under the boat. And for the next hour, 2 hours, man, they may draw it hard, and all of a sudden you didn't have a plan for if that happened. So I enjoy fishing in more of this scenario than I do a power generating deal.
Well, and I guess one thing I want to talk about today, of course, I'm biased toward Cave Run, but can you give me just a few specific techniques here for Cave Run? if you can speak to anything, like, there's guys out like Saturday, there's probably a dozen cars and boats over here at Scotts Creek even. Can you the lake? It's got some color to it now. We had a little rain. Hadn't really monkeyed with it too much. They've got it opened up a little bit down there, trying to get it back down. But all that being pretty consistent. Is there a decent wintertime strategy here if you want to go out and at least try to catch something to eat or that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I would probably, if I was on the main lake right now, I'd be looking deep, fishing deep water. So, and here's the key to that. Deep is a relative term. Some people are saying, hey, 14 feet's deep to me. I'm talking about deep in wintertime crappie fishing being, 25, 30 feet a lot of times.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, as much structure as there is on Cave Run Lake, it is difficult to find structure in 25 to 30 feet that holds.
Yeah, because most of it is put in at Summer Pool, and then they draw 6 foot off of it or whatever. Yeah, sure.
And so, and a lot of times those fish, they're not necessarily relating to a vertical piece of structure this time of year. Some people call them a stob or just a stand up or a stick up, whatever you want to call it. You may go out here in the Big Cave Run area or even up into Caney Creek. Tons of standing timber over here in Caney. You may fish 100 of them and not catch crappie off of them.
Yeah.
But if you can find one of those old ones that's fallen down over time and it's laying on the bottom, and it's more of a horizontal piece of structure, and you've got it at 28, 25, 28 feet of water, highly likely you can catch some nice crappie off of it. So that would be my main lake strategy.
Do you find, and I hear this from some of these guys that do fish for them year round, at least here they say they don't get as many bites this time of year, or I'll say catch as many fish, but they catch a better quality fish. Is that true? I mean,
very, very true.
Really?
Okay. We see that happen a lot. I think fish are just healthy this time of year, despite the fact the water temperature is way down. A lot of times what's going on right now, if you clean a crappie, you go over and catch a female crappie right now, she's going to be half full of eggs right now.
Really? Even there right now?
We catch them early December, and they start forming eggs already. And then not only that, but they're feeding up, trying to get ready for colder temperatures. We're just finding a lot of misconceptions, that we've had as anglers, myself included, over the years about, we think these poor crappie, man, in the winter, they're just down there barely moving and they can't hardly get anything to eat and they're probably going to starve to death before spring. And, you will catch your share of that you can read a newspaper. But more likely you're going to catch fish and they're going to be extremely healthy this time of year. And, if you read a graph very well, you'll figure out why, because there's certain areas of the lake and the river system where shad are just balled up, and despite popular opinion, when a crappie gets ready to eat, he can catch a bait fish. No problem doing that.
Sure.
So these fish are out, especially your larger fish that are getting eggs and they're preparing for that spawn that's going to come.
Right.
They're out here eating.
Okay.
And they're healthy.
And, moving on from this time of year, say we get into spring here at Cave Run, pre-spawn, water temperature warming up, fish are really starting to get active, barring any kind of crazy weather like the lake up 30 foot and all that stuff, but just typical stuff, maybe a few feet above Summer Pool, but just everything a decent spring here at Cave Run. What can we recommend for people to do then?
You're going to start seeing the fish kind of move into these creek arms that time of year, getting ready for the spawn. Beaver Creek is a very popular area that time of year for fish, and for good reason. A ton of structure in there. And you've also got another thing that helps stand is a prominent creek channel that time of year.
Right.
So what we've noticed time and again on these lakes is big female crappie, a male will typically move up sooner in the shallow water than the female will.
Right.
And the female will do a lot of suspending. They'll do a lot of staying out there and staging waiting for the ideal scenario for them to move in. And that not only includes water temperature, because a lot of people like their water temperature watchers, those guys.
True, yeah.
Say, man, I'm gonna make a trip down to Weiss Lake this year, or Weiss Lake, and I'm waiting for it to get 64 degrees. When it does, it'll be on.
Yeah.
That can be true. I mean, I think there's an optimal or ideal range there for fish to spawn in.
Right.
But it takes more than that. It takes light penetration. It takes the right color on the water. It takes sometimes even the right moon phase for these fish to decide to spawn. But I will say this, primarily that time of year, you're going to be looking for shallow cover. You'll probably catch a lot of male fish early in the spawn, shallow cover. As the spawn goes on a few days or a week or so, you'll see big females. You'll start catching them. One tip that I can probably give folks is don't think too shallow too quick. Big females like to lay out deeper and wait. So even though you're up there, if you're catching a lot of those real colored up, real pretty males.
Now, will they be suspended off just in open water, or will they be suspended? Will they just find some deeper cover to hang out around until time to move?
That is a time of the year, Dan, where a lot of fish are going to suspend in open water.
Okay.
You will see that happen. Without good electronics, you would never know that. You just focus on standing timber, and you'll catch your share of good ones. But the really, really big females, a lot of times, are the ones that are out there suspending in open water, waiting to spawn.
Is that where the rigs come in, where you're just kind of coasting through there and off that point or off that channel break or whatever? That's where the rigs come in, and you're just kind of sweeping back and forth.
Exactly. I think post-spawn, immediately pre-spawn, and immediately post-spawn is when that spider rig stuff, to me, really, really shines. Because, you've got multiple offerings out there, give them plenty to look at, and fish that may be suspended. What a lot of guys do, they'll be moving from brush pile to brush pile, and they'll notice they start catching fish between the brush piles with that spider rig, and these fish aren't relating to structure, they're doing that. That speaks to some of the newer technology now. I don't have to put 8 poles out there to go target suspended fish. I can actually see them and go chase them.
And a lot of these questions I ask are just kind of to affirm my thinking or to find out if I'm way off base, but just my own experience, I find that like on sunny days or hot days or whatever, especially if you have clear water, these fish tend to want to hang in really tight to the cover, and then on the cloudier days, that's when they'll venture out away from it. At least that's what I've kind of found in my experience.
A lot of times that is true, and I don't know if they want the shade of that, of that structure, whatever. I think probably what it's doing more than anything is just giving them a better ambush spot. We do it when we're hunting. When I'm out turkey hunting or deer hunting, I try to get somewhere where I'm not reflecting light.
I think any fish, and I'm more familiar with this from the musky standpoint. I mean, most fish are what I would consider an ambush predator. They'll when like these muskies here, that's why these weed beds, at least in my opinion, are such good areas, because they can just ease back in that weed bed and just wait for the crappie or the bluegill or the largemouth or whatever to come by, and they just zip out and there they are. And I think crappie to a certain extent, although like you alluded to earlier, talking about the big balls of shad, I think they kind of relate to that, and they try to, every fish are just like humans. I mean, I think they relate to where the food is. And if there's a ball of shad that's at the mouth of Caney Creek, that fish isn't going to be in the back of Scotts Creek. That fish is going to try to figure out how to get there. At least that's what I think.
Hey, you've said a mouthful there, and I think it's a very, people say that all the time, but you watch them fish, and it's like they don't know, they don't believe it to be true. And it's one of the things you mentioned earlier about, hey, when we go to a lake, how do we go about targeting, how do we find the fish? That is one huge thing that I'm doing, is looking on side imaging and trying to figure it out. And you start, if you listen, I'm an avid follower of the Elite Series. I love Bassmaster. I love listening to their live. I learn more about fishing in general by watching those guys on live than anything.
Yeah.
And you'll hear those guys use a term all the time. They're talking about chain of life. And they'll say, I got back here and there's just a lot of life. There's a lot going on back here.
Right.
And I learned that a few years ago to listen. I was just like, I've overlooked that so many times as a fisherman. I'll go in an area and I'll see bait, and then I don't immediately catch fish, and I'm out of there. And I'm going to some area with dead water. If you're finding a ton of bait and that chain of life stuff, like your graph's just lit up with fish and bait fish and clutter and stuff going on, slow down.
I mean, if there's food there, there's going to be fish there, and you just got to figure out how to make them bite. And then that, to me, is where the electronics comes in, especially if you can pick that fish out and you can target that fish. I was watching one of those Elite Series deals the other day from, I think it was last year when they were on Santee Cooper, and the guy's got the big 12-inch screen up on his boat, and he's pointing out, he said, well, there's a stump and there's a stump, and there it's about a 4-pounder right there on the backside of that stump off to the right, and he targeted that fish and just laid it right there on top of it. He went through 2 or 3 different lures, I think it was, but he finally found one that and everything. So well, this has been pretty interesting today. Is the electronics going to be just a game changer for the whole?
It already is.
Yeah,
it is, Dan. There are some guys right now that are very outspoken about some of this new technology having the potential to hurt the fishing industry if we're not careful.
I could see that.
Yeah, and I want to kind of jump on that bandwagon for a minute today, and this is setting aside, not trying to be controversial about it. I've eaten so many fish in my lifetime. I would never tell somebody.
To
eat.
Sure.
But I am going to say this is just. We need to be conservation minded. I'll say another thing. I've eaten my share of them, but I've never taken more than I'm going to eat.
Right.
Enough to feed me and enough to feed those, that my family. And, you've got the ability now to do things with this technology that we never had before. You just have to be conservation minded.
Well, like those guys at, what was that, in Texas a couple of weeks ago, they caught how many fish did they fillet out? I want to say like 375 fish or something like that. It was an enormous. And the way they found them, somebody reported a fish kill. They just saw some fish floating out in the back of a creek, but they didn't really look at it. So they called, I guess, the Department of Natural Resources down there, and they come and check it out. And it was a bunch of left fillets, bunch of just skeletons and stuff. And they got to checking into it, and they caught these guys, and they had I want to say 375 or 400 fish that they had filleted out, that they had caught literally in just a day or two, and that's no good.
No, it's not. And we see this go on a lot, and I know, it's, again, not to be controversial about things, but it's just things we really need to think about because we want to preserve our fisheries for our kids.
Yep.
It's important.
Yeah.
And one thing to think about is, a lot of guys, they'll go down to a lake and they've got their freezer stocked full and they still want to fish, but I don't know if it's, I want to take pictures so that everybody can see I caught them on social media or what, but they get in this habit maybe for the next month or two after they've got their freezer stocked of catching for every neighbor up and down the road. And they say, well, I want to supply my neighbor with food, and that's great. You should help out your neighbors if they can't. But are you sure your neighbor's eating all those things? Are we sure that you're doing it because you want to feed your neighbor, or you're doing it because you just like to catch fish and throw them in the live well? It doesn't take long to hurt fisheries, especially in an 8,200 acre lake. I will say this, Dan, the majority of these fish in this lake right here, I'm a firm believer that they migrate to a certain area of this lake this time of year. I'm not going to discuss where that's at, but I am. Many people know where that's at, and many people camp out there every day. 10 years ago, it was places on this lake you could go and never see another boat in winter.
Right.
Now you'll go and see 6, 8, 10 boats a day in those areas.
And I think that is, I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think one is the accessibility of the information now. I mean, you can, if you want to know what the fish are doing, you can just pull it up on your phone. There'll be somebody posting about it somewhere. And then, in what we've been talking about the majority of the time, the electronics. One of my regular customers was in here a couple of days after Christmas and got some minnows and stuff. And he had he was trying out his new, I think it might have been a Lowrance or something like that. Said it paid like $2,000 for it, and I mean, this guy's a regular crappie fisherman. He's a crappie guy even before that, and I mean, he caught a ton of them before, so he's going to make them live that much harder now and everything. But
and I say with that deal, man, hey, catch the fire out of them, enjoy it. That's what they're there for. Take just what you need to eat, or maybe what your family or your buddy needs to eat. The rest back. I mean,
but now this guy here, he doesn't keep anything unless it's about 10 inches. So awesome. But gosh, I've seen a lot of guys that, if it's big enough to bite a hook, it goes in the bucket.
And talking with the biologists, I always said that too. About the small fish, and I learned a thing or two about that. He told me, he said, it's kind of a misconception. He said, the fish from all different age classes need to be taken out of this lake, but you don't need to target necessarily one age class of fish. Sure. So, if you're taking out all the 10 to 12 inch fish, and that's all you're targeting, everybody's targeting that, then you're going to have that gap there of 10 to 12 inch fish that's getting hammered pretty hard. So,
and I get this here a lot, and I'm not really looking to get into any kind of a controversial opinion about it. I just you may know more of the reasoning behind it, but I have people come in here from out of town, out of state, and they always want to know what the size limit is here on the crappie. And there's never been one here, but I know there is at other lakes. And is that just because they're trying to manage it better and up the numbers and that kind of thing? Because you hear a lot of people that come in say, "I wish they'd do that here," and I go both ways on it. I'm thinking, well, if they had a size limit like that here, I think you'd have an overabundance of small fish and they'd get kind of stunted. I don't really know if that's a needed thing here or not.
And, that's wonderful. I wish that folks had an opportunity. We've got a biologist here. We got two area biologists, but Tom Timmerman, I know in particular, is always great about sharing information and things. He's really helped me. I was a guy that fished down here my whole life. Thought I knew a lot about what needed to happen in terms of, we need slot limits for bass, or we know, whatever it is.
Right.
Tom really helped me understand the science behind and the mathematics behind these numbers. And when they do shock and creel surveys and figure out what type of fish you've got. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my takeaway from some of our conversations has kind of been this, is that it's super important to have fish from all different age classes in your fishery. If you've got predominantly older fish and no new fish, that's a problem. You got a predominantly new fish and not older fish, you've got a problem there. You want them from all age ranges. But what's going on is, long as you're seeing a healthy number of keeper-sized fish, which we see on this lake, it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
And I think that people believe if we do a certain thing, then that means that they're going to be able to go down here and load the boat every time they come. It's a ligotrophic lake. You're probably never going to do that too much. You'll have good years where that'll happen. But furthermore, if you can do it and go out here and catch 60 fish with no problem, then everybody can do it. And it's not going to take long before you run fish. Right. So there is something to be said about the survival of the species.
And that's like, like I mentioned at the beginning here, my mom and dad built this place in 1974, and catch and release wasn't even a thing. And I remember we had a rack out in front here where people would get their pictures made, and it was nothing to see that thing just hung full of crappie. Or back then, I think the muskie deal was a 30 inches size limit, but you could keep 4 of them in a day. And it was nothing to see somebody with a picture of 3 or 4 hanging there, and those fish weren't going back in the water. They were going in the freezer. And ever since they started cutting back on the possession limit for fish, but then especially the muskie, once they started increasing the size limit, a lot of people that are going to eat them don't like it, but people that are just trying to catch them and want those trophy fish, they don't mind it so much. Once they went to the 34, 36 inch one fish per day deal, I've noticed that there's just a bigger abundance of the upper 40, what I would consider, at least for here, a trophy class fish. And so I think they do a pretty good job down at Clark. I think they manage it pretty well.
I'll tell you, they're almost like a law enforcement. They're kind of almost in a no-win situation.
Well, they are. I mean, if people aren't happy with the fishing, it's their fault and all like that. And it's just, it's fishing, it just is. Well, Kris, this has been fun today. Have you got anything you want to add as far as anything else about Cave Run, or talk about Crappie USA and what's the deal with that? They have their local tournaments here, and it's pretty easy to join and stuff, isn't it?
Certainly. It's been a couple years, Dan, since they've had an event. I looked at the schedule, this coming year, we don't have one scheduled for here, but I'd imagine that there'll come a day they'll swing back through here.
Okay.
Crappie USA, they fish a lot of different lakes around the state. Green River is usually a staple on their schedule.
Okay.
Lake Cumberland, out Kentucky Lake and Barkley. Extremely easy to join. Go to crappieUSA.com. There's several great tournament trails right now within.
Now, are those just 1-day tournaments?
Some are 2-day tournaments.
Okay.
We've got 1 and 2-day tournaments. So the local qualifying events are typically 1-day events. They have what's called super events, which are 2-day. We've also got tournament trails all across the state. One of the best trails we got going is Kentucky Crappie Trail. It's getting some huge turnouts to some of the tournaments.
Okay.
We've got a guy, David Salisbury, that actually leads the Kentucky Crappie Trail Cave Run division here on Cave Run. You can get online and look Kentucky Crappie Trail Cave Run division.
Okay.
There will be a schedule on there of events that they have here.
Okay. And now who are they affiliated with?
They are their own standalone.
Okay.
So it's Kentucky Crappie Trail.
Good deal.
They've got different divisions. They've got a Green River division, Lake Cumberland.
And they have a ton of tournaments here. I'm thinking that's I'm thinking that's a bunch that I'm familiar with here. They have and they start pretty early.
We've got some early tournaments. I think in February we actually fished a tournament this weekend, this past Saturday with Crappie or Kentucky Crappie Trail, the Green River division.
Okay.
And so there's all kinds out there. I'll say this. This is probably one of the most important things that I feel like about tournament fishing for us. We used to fish this lake. It's our home lake. We thought we were pretty good at fishing this lake. Some of the first tournaments they had, out-of-staters came and whipped our tail on our home water. What that did for us was made us realize that there's a lot about this game we don't know.
Sure, yeah.
We got out and began to truly learn how to crappie fish and how to find them, and we feel like we're so much better crappie fishermen because of the tournament experience. Tournaments aren't for everybody. Some guys just don't enjoy that. They like to lounge around, and it's great, but it's really helped us. I'll say this: tournament crappie fishermen, whether the weekend guy likes to admit it or not, a lot of them don't. A lot of guys that don't fish tournaments are anti-tournament guys.
Right.
But what they don't realize is the tournament fishermen are setting the standard for the equipment that they're using, for the techniques that they're going to use. They're just shaping and molding. And it's pretty neat sometimes to be on that cutting edge.
And speaking of equipment, I keep thinking of things here I want to talk about. Speaking of equipment, we've talked about the electronics, but just the basic, just rods and reels, line. I know, like in the bass world, which is what I predominantly fool with, it's getting any more to where it's almost technique specific. I mean, there's line for topwater, and there's rods that are made for, a particular type of plastics fishing, whether it's a fishing a creature bait or a worm and that kind of thing. Reels have different retrieves and all that sort of thing. Is it that in depth in the crappie world?
Every bit, yeah, every bit is in depth. We've got my dad and I are blessed to be sponsored by a couple companies that. One is B&M Pole Company.
Sure.
B&M has been the industry standard for a lot of years, for decades.
Yeah.
And the reason why is they build custom, well, I won't say custom, they build specialty rods for whatever technique the angler wants to go for.
Okay.
So there's so many different things, from spider rigging to single pole jigging to guys that shoot docks to people like the bobber fish.
I've seen those dock shooter guys.
Pretty cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Technique.
Yeah. And then, does line make a difference?
Certainly. It certainly does. We can get into that. A lot of guys now that are doing this single pole jig fishing, it's becoming more and more popular. They're using braid. They want to be able to feel that everything that's going on.
I get that. I see that. I get that.
It's kind of been unheard of, because people are like, why do you need a 10, 12-pound braid to catch a little old crappie? Because you want to feel that.
It's not the line size so much, or trying to, like it is with bass, where you're maybe trying to pull it out of a 6-pound bass out of a treetop. It's more just the sensitivity of it and what you can feel and all like that. Is fluorocarbon a big thing in the crappie world?
Not so much. There are some guys using fluorocarbon, but it's not so much a thing. A lot of them, you're seeing it if they're using it. It's a leader,
Yeah, sure.
Extremely clear water scenarios, fluorocarbon can help. I've been fishing some fluorocarbon this year in 4-pound test in some clear fisheries like Lake Cumberland,
right?
Some places like that.
Right.
It's not a huge deal yet, but one thing about it, it's a great finesse deal when you're downsizing and using extremely small weights.
Yeah.
Sometimes we may go all the way down to a 32nd ounce weight.
Right.
When the bite's extremely finicky.
Okay.
Fluorocarbon helps in that scenario.
Okay.
So you're seeing people use monos, braids, fluorocarbons. There's even like a nano fill.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah,
now.
Yeah.
And guys are using all that for different scenarios.
Okay.
So this equipment, I happen to work, Dan, for a company. It's called Leland's Lures. Leland's Lures is the maker of trout magnet and crappie magnet.
Right.
And they've sponsored Dad and I on the tournament trail for several years with crappie magnet. And the owner there, Jeff Smith, has been very instrumental in developing a product line, what he considers a full lineup of products for crappie fishermen. So now you're even seeing it affect the industry from that standpoint. Is guys aren't just making jigs anymore. They're making specialty jigs. They're making jig heads. They're making floats. They're making line. They're making all these things. So we've literally seen this industry explode to where now companies can really expand their product offering. So it's been a neat thing.
The one thing I noticed talking about equipment and stuff. I was watching Kentucky Field. Oh gosh, it's probably been last year, and they were out crappie fishing with this guy, and they were crappie fishing. It was down western Kentucky, but they were on the Ohio River. But they weren't fishing on Ohio River. They were fishing some of those little backwater creeks and tributaries and stuff. And they were fishing there, and they were talking fishing and stuff. Well, he's got the big long pole, probably 12 or 14 foot, and he catches his fish. Well, then all of a sudden, he starts getting this dip net out, and this dip net's probably got a 16-foot handle on it, and he just reaches out there and he nets that fish. It's the funniest thing. I don't know why, it just struck me funny. Do you guys have one of those big long dip nets like that?
We do. Yeah, we absolutely do. And I'll tell you what goes on with that. It's kind of a strange deal. They're making rods that, they make a 20-footer being in there. And what goes on with spider rigging is, especially in a shallow water scenario. So let's journey in your mind with me to Grenada Lake down in Mississippi.
Sure, yeah.
3-pound crappie.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times when those big, huge females are getting ready to spawn, they may be in 2 and 3 feet of water.
Right.
And you're out there with a 20-foot pole. Well, when you hook that fish, there's no way you can get that fish back to you.
No, there's not. I mean, I understand the logistics of it.
So it's a pretty neat deal, and that's where your partner plays such an important role.
Man, I have such a hard time just trying to keep my little short-handled dip net straight in my boat. I can't imagine trying to wrestle something like that around.
My dad and I have always opted to. We're pretty much. Single pole guys. That's basically all we've been. We've experimented around with some spider rigging mainly on our free time.
Yeah.
But we like the single pole jig. It's a way simpler deal than fishing multiple poles and length. But man, there's some guys out there that are like artists with that. Big long rods. They're great.
Well, I guess, we'll wrap it up here in a minute, but you were talking about Grenada Lake there, and it just made me think of a question. You fished all these crappie lakes and stuff, and you could pick one lake to fish, not even competitively fish, but just a lake where you just wanted to go and just be able to catch crappie, and all that. I mean, where is that?
Yeah. I've got a couple of favorite locations. Probably, I had a chance this last year to fish Arkabutla in northern Mississippi with a friend and a fellow pro staffer, TJ Shands, and that lake was just phenomenal. It's unbelievable the amount of 2.5 pound crappie in that lake.
I can't imagine.
We just went down there that day and wore them out, and just really fun fishing. That would have to be a top choice. For this state, I always like to mention this state.
Sure, yeah.
People think, man, I got to go down south to catch big crappie, and they really don't. They are catching some huge black crappie right now out of Del Hollow Lake.
Right.
There's part of that exists in Kentucky and the Northern Arms, and Lake Cumberland produces some really big black crappie. But I will have to say, probably my favorite in the state is Lake Barkley.
Lake Barkley. Okay.
My dad and I had an opportunity one day of a tournament last year or 2 years ago. We went down, we caught 13, 48, and 7 fish. So, almost a 2-pound average.
Oh, man.
It's some fun fishing now.
I'm telling you. And, and all those places are within an easy drive as far as that goes. That's good, too. That's good too. Well, Kris, I want to thank you for coming in today, and hopefully we can do this again soon. I enjoy finding out what's going on in the fishing world and what's new out there and everything. And hope to have you back again soon.
Well, I'd love to, Dan. Thanks for having me. I want to say one thing before we close out, guys. Everything that I've said. There's no science or hard and fast rules to fishing. And, I've listened to guys over the years talk at podcasts and on things, and they talk about everything like it's an absolute. We haven't got this thing figured out. That's the fun of it for me, is every day I'm learning. So you may have heard something today that you're thinking, well, you're crazy, and maybe I am. Maybe I learned that something that I said wasn't accurate. Don't judge me too hard on that. But we just love it. We're students of the sport, and I think that's the main thing here, is that people, that if you've got a passion for the sport, just keep an open mind, always be learning. And I just want to say God bless everybody this coming 2021. I hope everybody that's listening has a blessed year.
All right. Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as Kris alluded to earlier, he's a big believer that these crappie migrate to one spot on Cave Run Lake. So just keep an eye out for him. You can kind of watch and see where he goes to, because like he said, he ain't going to give up that information willingly. So, if you come to Cave Run, just keep your eyes open. And as I like to say when we get ready to sign off, just get outdoors with Hook Outdoors. Have a good day.